Hello, 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 hello. Good afternoon. How are you guys? It has been some time. Good afternoon. We'll give everybody some time to jump on. So good to see all of you guys coming in. Haven't had a chance to connect and chat in a while. It's just been, I actually took a little bit of a break. We had our big exciting month in April. Had a lot going on, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna rest a little bit, and so I'm excited to be back to talk with you guys and connect. And it's gonna be fun. We're gonna be talking about becoming your whole and healthy self. Yesterday I shared a post that resonated a lot with a lot of people in terms of just becoming whole and healthy. And so I wanted to get into it, break it down a little bit more, and just give you guys some steps to take. Rest is good, rest is a must. Marie said he loves my background. Yeah, this is part of my office. We haven't had a chance to do a tour of my office yet, but it's almost done. So, love, 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 love the background. Um, so yeah, I wanted to just get on here and just really, chat a little bit about what it takes to become whole and what it takes to become healthy, and how to just kind of step into the fullness of your life. Um, and it's a big kind of buzz thing right now. A lot of people understand the importance of wholeness, they understand the importance of health. And of course, for believers, we all know that it's like quintessential, right? It's quintessential that we walk whole and we walk in fullness. And I want to say this, a lot of people feel like, you can never be totally whole. And I believe that that's a lie. I believe that you can get to a point where you are living at your max level, max wholeness. It's kind of the same thing, the excuses that people make, like, well, we always sin. I really believe you can go through a day without sinning. I believe that it's possible that you can guard your heart, you can guard your thoughts. It doesn't mean you're never going to sin again, or you're not going to have moments when you're not operating out of the full wholeness of who you are. But I think that as believers, we gotta push ourselves up a little bit more. We gotta challenge ourselves to take this thing to the next level in terms of the standards in which we live. And so I'm going to be teaching from the 10 clues that I shared yesterday on operating. How do you know that you're operating and serving from a healed place? Because the worst thing is when you want to build a business, you want to get married, you want to get in ministry, you want to be, that person, and then you're not whole. And then you're serving out of this broken place, you're building out of this broken place. And what you see is a lack of fruitfulness. And so as I go through each of these, I'm going to give you guys some steps on how do you get to that point? Like, what do you need to do to actually be operating in that place? Now, wholeness has a lot to do with how you see yourself. So you can write that down. Wholeness has a lot to do with how you see yourself. It's not even so much, who did you forgive? What did you let go? That comes after you get clarity about who you are as a person. And when you make a decision about who you're going to be, how you're going to show up, how you want to be represented in whatever spaces God has given you, it then impacts, right, how you choose to interact with people. And so the first thing is, who am I going to be as a person, right? For believers, we talk about sonship a lot here, especially at Ask Dr. Faith. Like, that's my thing, identity. Purpose. Our identity comes from knowing that we are loved by God, knowing that He chose us, not because we're good enough, not because we're perfect enough, not because we've got it all together, right? And so me becoming whole is because it's an invitation into becoming who God always called me to be, and an invitation to step into what sonship really looks like. Y'all know that sonship is not, being part of, a church or network or something something, then there's hundreds and hundreds of sons to a man or a woman. That's not sonship. Sonship is saying that I am loved and I belong because the Father loves me. Now, this is always easier said and done. And in July, you get the opportunity to join our mentoring program where we kind of develop you and walk you through sonship and help you understand what this looks like. But you've got to really search and say, where do I get my identity? Like, do I get it from how people perceive me? Do I get it from what people say about me? Do I get it from what I think the world needs, right? Because once we have clarity about who we are and who we want to be, it's going to really impact everything else. So one of the first things that I said is that when a person is whole and healed, they are not easily offended. What is offense? Offense is when we have a qualm or an issue with someone, either because they did something or they didn't do something, either because or they didn't meet an expectation that we had. And oftentimes, expectations is a huge issue when it comes to offense. One person had this expectation, they didn't usually, the issues, they didn't communicate that expectation. And when the other person or group of people don't meet those expectations, they get offended. When someone says something or does something that we don't like or doesn't sit well with us, we get offended. Well, a mature and healed person is able to separate what a person does or doesn't do from how we react. Right. And the only way that you can do that is because you understand who I expected to behave or act a certain way. And they've never acted ill against me, right? They've always treated me kindly or rightly. And they act in a way that is outside of their nature. Because I'm mature and I'm whole, I can say, no problem, right? I'm going to give you grace because this is outside of your nature. Now, some of us, I don't know why we get offended with people who've been showing you who they are this whole time. Like they've been showing you that they don't care. They've been showing you that they undermine what you have to say. They've been showing you, and yet you have the nerve to get offended. Maya Angelou said it best, right? When people show you who they are, believe them. And so oftentimes we get offended because we choose to live in ignorance. You can write that down. We get offended because we choose to live in ignorance. What do I mean? If someone has a behavior and they have shown you that behavior at least 3 times in a row, I'm going to say that's who they are. That's just their nature. And so therefore, when they act in this way that they've been acting, I don't have to get offended, because the truth is, when you're mature and whole, you know that you get to create the type of environment and the type of space that is around you. And so if you have shown me over and over that this is how you view me, or this is how you conduct yourself, I'm not going to I'm not going to release my energy, right? And I'm not talking about just your efforts, right? In trying to fix this or work this or be offended when you've shown me yourself. But when you, as somebody, act outside of your nature, and even though it may have hurt me, I'm mature and whole, so I'm not going to be offended because this is not who you are. And one of the ways to do that is when you're learning wholeness about who you are, especially in the process of God. And that's why right now there's all these self-help books out there, and the new age has jumped on this stuff, but we cannot really be whole unless we see people the way that God sees them. And so when you become more like the Father and you become whole and you heal your past wounds and you forgive, then when someone hurts you or offends you, you learn how to see them the way that God sees them instead of in the way that you would have normally seen them. So one of the ways that you know that you're whole is that you see people differently. You see people differently. Where you would have gone off, you'd have cut them off, you now see them differently, which leads us to the next one, right? You will be patient with people who know less, misunderstand you, or disagree. This is a huge one for online life, right? Whole people don't go back and forth with people that are in disagreement with them, right? They don't sit there and go back and forth, especially with people who don't know them, don't know their situation, don't know all of the information. So I'll give my own personal example. If I say something, I make a comment on social media, and someone comes and they come with an air like they've got it figured out, they know me, they know maybe why I said something or whatever, I'm not going to go back and forth with them, right? Because I am a base, I'm lowering my standards and coming and meeting them at their level, trying to convince somebody who doesn't really know me, right? And so why would I do that? The only reason people do that is because they want to be understood, right? And it's a natural human desire. We all want to be known. We all want to be understood. And so we will try and try and try to explain ourselves to people who are not even trying to hear us. But when you're whole and you are healed and you are mature, you understand that if I am misunderstood, it does not mean that something is wrong with me. If I am not fully understood by someone, and sometimes it's someone we value or someone we love, it doesn't mean that I am broken. But a lot of times when we're not whole, we'll spend hours trying to get people who are already made a decision to not understand us to understand us. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, say, I understand, right? If that makes sense to you, I understand. So there is a need for us to be heard. There is a need for us to be understood, but don't spend all your time trying to be understood by people who don't take time to know you. If you've spent years and months and you have taken the time to know me, then I'm going to work hard to make sure that we're on the same page. If we're in social media and you don't understand me, if I'm whole, I can let that go and be like, it is what it is, right? When a person is whole, they have this level of understanding that oftentimes people that don't have all the information, I don't have to get upset with them, right? So let's say somebody's like, starts spreading gossip about you, right? They heard from somebody that they know why you don't roll with this person anymore, and they're spreading that gossip around. Well, a person who's not really whole, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be trying to squash that gossip. They're going to be running from this person to that person, trying to give clarity and trying to share their side of their story, because this is another part of human nature. We want people to agree with us, right? And this is how people create diabolical partnerships, or they create what we call born bonds. Trauma bonds, right? They went through a trauma. They look for other people who went through the same trauma. So they share the same stories, or they look for someone who also doesn't like the same person that they don't like, right? Or they look for people who left the same church that they left, right? And they create these bonds based on trauma, based off of an experience, because it is human nature for us to want to find people that agree with us, right? And so, if we cannot find people that agree with us, we're going to keep looking and looking and looking for people that agree with us. Well, it shows me that you're not really whole, because if you know that what you did or where you are is from a pure place or from a pure heart, then everybody doesn't have to agree. And I don't have to bash somebody or gossip about a certain situation so that I can get people to agree with me. People that are not whole are always going to look for agreement, because they don't feel like what they believe and what they know to be true is enough. But what that does is it causes us to get into relationships sometimes that are toxic and that are not healthy. And so one of the ways that you know that you are whole is that it's okay if, one, I'm misunderstood, everybody doesn't know the full story. Two, you don't necessarily agree with my viewpoint. It's okay. Now, these things require maturity. It takes a level of wholeness. It takes a level of grit to get to that point as an individual. When we have lower levels of maturity as individuals, we're always going to automatically lean to finding the ones that always agree. And this is why I don't understand. Like, as a person, you don't always want to have yes men around you. You don't always want to have everybody that always agrees, because if you can't be challenged by someone who disagrees, what does that say about you, right? You need to be able to have people that disagree with you, and you not feel like, well, I got to convince them to agree with me. It's okay if we disagree. It's okay if you have a different opinion. That doesn't diminish me, and it doesn't diminish you. Does that make sense? And so when we're living in wholeness, we are okay with what we call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is that it's that imbalance. And sometimes we're going to have relationships or issues that come up where there's no agreement. And that's okay. I don't have to change my position in order to get into that place of harmony. All of us internally like to be at that place of harmony, right? That place of harmony is when everything is going okay, kumbaya, my Lord. But then what happens is, for a lot of us who are people pleasers, a lot of us who don't know how to speak up for ourselves, because we don't like to be in that place of, what's the word? It's not disharmony, where it's just not, there's no harmony internally. We bend and we bow and we say, okay, well, maybe I'll just believe what they're saying about me, when you know that it's not true. And so you've got a mature person is okay with those places where, you know what, like, there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance here. There's a little bit of tension. Thank you, my dear, for that word. There's a little bit of tension here, and you have to be okay with that. It's a sign of maturity, because if you're not okay with tension, you will oftentimes be the one who is bending. You will oftentimes be the one who's dumbing themselves down because you're trying to please people. Okay. All right. Another sign of wholeness and healing is that you don't run away from conflict, right? And so that's that tension. So a lot of people don't like to deal with conflict because they don't like tension. And who likes tension, right? Well, some people are crazy and they love tension. They're always in mess. There's always a problem. They're always going after something. I don't understand that, right? But you should be okay with, if there is a misunderstanding, or if there is an issue or something like that, that you are willing to go in and talk about it, right? And not run from the conflict. You're willing to confidently communicate your side of your story, or your needs, or your point of view. And you're willing to be in that space of tension for a moment, right? And sometimes in our relationships, or in whatever we do, you run into that conflict, you talk about it, and it doesn't resolve the way that you thought it would resolve. And that's okay as well, because sometimes we feel like, oh, I failed, or I'm not, maybe I didn't communicate clearly, because the tension didn't resolve. And it's okay to live in that space. When it becomes a problem is that when you begin to, what we call, ruminate. That means you're thinking about it all the time. You can't go to sleep. You're so worried. What that means is that you probably just need to either talk it over, or just really release it to the Lord, right? But people who are whole and mature don't avoid conflict, because the thing with avoiding conflict is that it's going to eat you up regardless. So you might as well deal with it. Another sign of wholeness and maturity is that you take correction and give yourself grace to not always get it right, right? So people think that if you are never corrected, then you're doing everything perfectly. But if you have no room for feedback and you have no room for mistakes, that tells me that you're not trying. It tells me that you're not innovative. It tells me that you're not creative. It tells me that you're not trying to go to the next level. And so when you are mature and you are whole, when people correct you, so let's go back. When you're not mature, when you're not whole, when you're dealing with the orphan mindset and rejection, all those things that we talk about here, when people give you correction, you see the correction as you're broken and something is wrong with you, right? But when you're mature and you're whole, when someone corrects you, you see it as two separate things. What I did needs to be corrected. It doesn't mean that my being needs to be corrected. And so people who struggle with the orphan mindset and rejection and still need healing, they don't like correction, because if someone says you did something wrong, you think everything about you is wrong. Right? So how do we know that you're healed and you're whole? If someone corrects you, you can take what they said and examine it and say, okay, how do I fix this? Or, do I agree with it? But it doesn't dampen your whole day. It doesn't make you throw away the baby with the bathwater. You're able to separate those two, and you actually welcome feedback, right? So feedback is always for the purpose of you getting better. Some of y'all don't even do well with feedback. Feedback is not criticism. Criticism is when someone is just telling you what you're doing wrong. Feedback is they tell you what you need to improve on and how you could do it, right? So when someone is critical, they just they point the finger at you, and that's the enemy. He's the accuser of the brethren. He's extremely critical. He doesn't tell you how to get better. He doesn't tell you how to improve. He just tells you, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're this, you're that. But people who love you give you feedback. Hey, when you yelled at that point, you probably shouldn't have yelled. I've noticed that you've been angry a lot. Is there something that's going on? Or, hey, when you made that painting, it'd have been great if you had used this color because I think it would bring this, right? And so the Lord is always giving constructive feedback, right? He's always giving you insight. He's people who love you are going to give you constructive feedback. If you're around someone who's constantly criticizing you, just telling you what's wrong with no solutions and no answers or even no steps on how to get help, then that person is partnering with the devil. He's partnering with the enemy. But when you have people around you who love you and they want to give you constructive feedback and you cannot take it, it's a clue that there is something going on with your identity and with your inner self that's not whole yet. All right. For those of you guys who are just jumping on, we're talking about how to grow in wholeness, how to get in that place where you're fully walking out who God has called you to be. All right. You don't shut down people or run away when situations are hard. This goes back to that being okay with tension, being okay with cognitive dissonance. One of the ways this appears is when people are struggling with a poverty mindset. They oftentimes run away in paying their bills. They will not deal with the issue at hand. They're just hoping that it will go away. This also happens, with church people. They would rather pray about something than actually deal with it. They would rather you do deliverance instead of them working on changing their thought pattern. They would rather you just pray a prayer of faith and not work hard, right? Pray for that miracle check instead of coming up with a plan to create the finances. We call this deferent faith. When you're deferring the issue, right? Instead of actually dealing with the issue at hand. And so you have to grow up and I know that's tough. It's tough, but it's right, right? You have to grow up and you have to deal with the issue at hand. Don't shrink back. Don't get so afraid that you don't want to deal with it and hope that it's just going to go away. When a person is whole and mature, they deal with that marriage issue that keeps showing up. They deal with that bill that they don't know. Maybe they call and say, how do we work out a plan? They deal with that friendship that both of you guys were just, stop talking to each other. One of you guys extends a hand because it is worth it. It is something that you value. It is something that is important. When you're doing these things, these are signs that you are whole. These are signs that you are mature, that you're growing in the image of Jesus Christ. So we don't run from pressure. This is another sign of maturity. You don't create unnecessary pressure. And how do you know? How do you do that? You are wise about the people that you have around you. A sign of wholeness is boundaries. If you have somebody and when they come around you, they always cause mess. You feel drained when you leave them, right? You have to be able to say, hey, man, I can only hang out with you for 30 minutes or an hour. Or, hey, I'm not going to be talking to you on the phone on a weekly basis. I'll check in once a month. And that's what I usually advise people with, borderline parents or family members that have personality disorders that are draining you or crazy. Like, set boundaries. That is a sign of maturity, because when you set boundaries, you don't have a lot of chaos in your life. You don't have a lot of mess. When I know somebody is a gossip, I mean, there's certain people, I talk to them for the first time, right? And all of a sudden they're telling me why they did this, why this. I'm like, oh no, that's going to be the last conversation, because you're going to bring a lot of drama into my life and I don't have the space for it. I don't have the space for it. That's another reason why I don't argue with people on Facebook. Like, I don't have the face for it. And I love a good debate, right? But do I have the energy to go into this, right? Is this even worth it at the end of the day? So a mature person knows how to create boundaries. They know how to identify people that are going to drain them. After a couple meetings, they look at the fruit of their lives and they can say, no, I would rather have 2 or 3 good friends than have a bunch of people around me, but there's always chaos and there's always mess and there's always something that is going on. All right. So a mature person understands that pressure and problems propel them, right? And they use whatever pain that they're in to help them see God in a different way. The good thing about being a believer is that we have an opportunity to know God in a different way. And so, if we use our problems and we use pressure to know God in a different way, we can grow more in His image. All right. So, I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to take your questions around wholeness, around healing, around any of the things that we've talked about, not being easily offended, growing from a place where we don't always have to be understood, where we always don't have to be in agreement, learning how to deal with conflict and communicate it effectively, learning how to take correction, learning how to deal with pressure. And then I'll come back another day and I'll do a part 2 here on how to grow in wholeness and healing. But I want to take some of your questions in the chat right now. All right. So good. Someone said, don't stop. You're in the spirit. You guys want me to finish it off? I have 4 more points. I can quickly do that. I can quickly finish it off if you want. And then I'll take your questions. Let me see. I need my charger. So if I lose you, I'll just jump on Instagram. Hopefully someone's coming to my rescue to give me my charger. All right. So yeah, you operate from a place of love, joy, and peace and not fear and control. How do you know you're whole? People like being around you because you're peaceable. People like being around you because you operate from a place of love. People like being around you because you are full of joy, right? But when you are still not whole, you are oftentimes fearful and you're always trying to control situations, and you may even be trying to control people. And when you're that type of person, people love to control because they don't trust. People love to control because they don't trust. How do we trust? We learn God's nature. We learn that He is unshakable. We learn that He is always for us. We learn that He is faithful to the end. If you don't know God as your Father, you're always going to be controlling. You're always going to be fearful. You're always going to be full of anxiety. And so part of stepping into wholeness is saying, God, what does it mean to have you as a father? Read how He treated the children of Israel, how patient He was, how forgiving He was. Look at the life of Jesus and how Jesus walked with His Father and what His Father told Him to do and how Jesus obeyed. That's how you learn to be fathered. Some of you are like, I don't have a father. I don't have any healthy mentors. Well, you have the Word of God. Spend time in it. Right? Look at other, you can find other men that have good fruit and look at how they treat their spiritual children and look at how they treat their natural children. That's how you learn how to be fathered, so that you could release fear and control, so that you could be a person of love and of peace and of joy. Another way that you know that you're whole is that you're okay with not always being recognized. So sons don't always have to be in the front. Sons can do something extraordinary and nobody ever clapped for them. Nobody ever recognized them. But if you're always wondering, well, they didn't say anything about what they did, they didn't help me, they didn't encourage me, they didn't, they always acknowledge those people but not me, it's the clue that there is something that's going on. It is normal for people to be recognized, to want to be recognized for their own work. There is nothing wrong with that. But if someone doesn't recognize you and it destroys you and it discourages you and it makes you want to quit, it's a sign that there are areas in your life that you need to grow in wholeness. Because if the Father in heaven recognizes you and celebrates you, that should be enough. There's going to be things that we do for our family members, that we do at work, that we do in ministry or at church, that nobody claps for you. And a whole person says, as long as heaven is rejoicing, it's okay. And that's the place that you got to get at. But when we're still struggling with wholeness, we get offended and we get frustrated when nobody recognizes us now. The next thing is that you mentor and teach others to be greater than you. A whole person is not afraid of competition. A whole person actually welcomes it because they're already confident. A whole person understands their uniqueness. And so part of the journey is you discovering what you're good at and what you're not good at, right? You need to do some self assessments. What are my spiritual gifts? What are my natural talents? What do I bring to the table that other people cannot bring to the table? And all of us have something that we bring to the table. And it starts with your history and it starts with your story. Nobody has your history. Nobody has your story. And the moment that you can overcome the things in your past and you can overcome your pain, those things become trophies and those things become tools to separate you from everybody else. So you can't be like, well, I don't know what I bring to the table. Well, tell me your story. Tell me where you came from. Tell me what you're overcoming. Once you overcome those become assets. And so we all have something that we can bring to the table. We all have something. And then beyond that, every believer has spiritual gifts. Take a spiritual gifts assessment. Get around people that can confirm those gifts. Get around people that can create spaces where you can be trained and developed. The more you do that, the more you can celebrate the individual that you are. When you can celebrate the individual that you are, then you can begin to walk in wholeness and not in competition and not in comparison. Because I can look at someone who does the same thing that I do, but because they don't have my story, they don't have my education, they don't have my experience, we're going to attract totally different people, right? And so this is where a lot of business people, entrepreneurs, ministry people fall, because comparison is not only a thief of joy, it's a thief of progress. It's a thief of you being able to fully step into what God has for you. And so when you learn not to compete and compare, you can then teach others to be greater than you. Because if I'm developing people and I have sons and daughters and mentees and people that I'm coaching, I understand that their success is going to be on my shoulders. So if they go further than me, I can celebrate that. I will be a small part of their success story. But when people have issues with competition and comparison, they will withhold information. They will withhold things that they can give to others. And the last one, people find you a safe place. How do you know that you are whole? They find you a safe place where they can come and share their stories. They can be themselves. They can be naked and transparent before you, and you don't judge them. And you give them tools and resources to be fully themselves. You don't make people be like you, right? You don't make you celebrate. The kingdom of God celebrates individuality, whereas the kingdom of the enemy wants everybody to be the same, wants everybody to look the same, everybody to act the same, right? Those are the makings of a cult, right? When everybody thinks the same way, nobody can think differently. If they think differently, they're challenged or they're ostracized or they're, whatever. Nah, that is not good. And so when you become healed and whole, you're a safe place and you welcome people and their ideas, and you can kick people out or say no, we're not going to do this, because you want it to be a safe place for everybody, but people feel safe with you. So those are the 10 things that I had shared on my social media, 10 clues that you're operating and serving in wholeness, and I wanted to give you guys those steps on how to emerge and grow. All right. So I'll take a couple of questions, but if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, my computer is on very, very little percent. So if this live ends, you can join me on Instagram, but it will be posted on YouTube and Facebook, and Instagram will save it for you guys as well. All right, here's a question. If you have a question, put hashtag Q. All right. It says, I'm noticing some of these things in my 9-year-old, such as if I correct him, he feels as though something is wrong with him. What steps do I need to take to keep this from getting worse? Give him identity. Tell him he's loved. Tell him he belongs. Tell him he's not what he does, but you love him for who he is. And begin to develop sonship in your children, because the world is going to try to shame them. It's going to try to criticize their identity. So it's the job of a parent to give clear identity to their children. Tell them who they are, who God says they are, and teach them these things that you are learning as well. All right. Questions. You can drop your questions in the comments, put a hashtag Q, Facebook and YouTube. I'm going to try to hang in there as much as I can, and answer your questions as well. How do you become whole? How do you step into everything that God has called you to be? In this season, this is going to be so important, because the Lord actually has so much for us. He has so many good things for us, but we have to step into it. All right. You 13-year-olds, 7-year-olds, you parents, you've got to give them identity outside of things, outside of gifting. You got to teach your children who God says they are. You got to give them God confidence, right? That's what I call it, God confidence, because any other confidence outside of that is going to wane. It's not going to be enough. After being wronged by a sister in Christ, how do you know you really have forgiven when talking about it to others to teach seasonal friends? I wouldn't use it. You know that you are forgiven because your heart's you've forgiven. Your heart's not raw, and you don't wish anything bad on that person, and you've actually had a discussion with that person. If you say your sister wronged you but you never talked about it or tried to talk about it, but you're telling everybody else about it as a lesson, that might be viewed as gossip. But if you guys had a discussion and you agreed to disagree, or sometimes you try to have a discussion with someone, but because they're not healed, they don't want to have the discussion, or they feel like you're the one who's wrong. But as long as you try to extend a hand, you tried to talk about it, and it ended amicably. Amicably doesn't mean it always ends well. And then watch how many times you're using it as a lesson, because if they're always coming up in your lessons, you're probably not healed. Because after a while, a healed person begins to forget and begins to release certain things that it's not always coming up. But if it's always coming up, you're probably still processing through it, and I would wait to share it as a lesson. All right. Is it wrong to usually pray about stuff instead of talking to someone about it because of the track record of them making excuses? Well, if it has to do with them, you need to talk about them, talk to them. But if you've talked to them and they don't want to make changes, then you need to make a decision about how you move forward, because they've already shown you what they want to do. You can pray about it, but God is also not going to manipulate anybody to do what you want them to do, because that would be witchcraft, right? And so if a person has made a decision that they're not going to do something, you've talked about it, and they don't want to, you've got to figure out how to move forward. How do you not get overwhelmed with becoming or healing? Well, you do it not out of your own strength. You do it in the Holy Spirit. And I would encourage you to do it with a group, right? So our DTA is going to be opening up again in July. And that is our mentorship program where we walk you through these steps of healing and how you become whole. And so when you see other people winning, that encourages you to become whole. When you have questions, you have people to ask, right? You do it within a community. You always get healed in a community. It just makes it much easier. Thank you, Dr. Faith. When is the next coaching class? Next year. All right. Our inner healing and deliverance class, this is for people who want to teach these things and help people walk through inner healing and deliverance. That course is going to be opening up in July, but it's going to be towards the end of July. Early July, we're going to be opening up our mentoring program where you get mentored by me in these things that we're talking about. All right. A sister in Christ tells me her story. When I minister to her, she continues to return to vomit. How do I let her go? Just let her go. If people don't want to change and they just want to gripe and they complain, you need to put a boundary. If I've listened to your story 2-3 times, but I've given you advice and you don't want to change, you figure it out on your own, because that stuff is going to stick to you. It's gunk that is sticking to you. And if you have a mercy gift, you want to help everybody, the best thing you could do with certain people is let them go and let God help them. All right. Recently divorced, shared custody. Our 10-year-old daughter is becoming very closed off like her father. How can I get her to open up? Stopped therapy at the advisement of the therapist because she refused to with her. Give her space. Give her space. Don't say, let's talk, let's talk, let's talk. What does she love to do? Is she artistic? Does she love a sport? She's 10. Give her space. All right. When I say space, don't mean let her be in her room by herself, but stop trying to push it if she's not willing to be open right now. Pray. That's something that you can pray into. Your description of a whole person makes me feel so encouraged and see a lot of this in myself, yet had so many people in church just treat me like everything's wrong with me. Why is this? Well, if you see yourself changing, right, then go back to number 1 or 2. You don't always have to have people agree with you. All right, folks on Facebook and YouTube, my computer is about to die. So if you want to jump on my Instagram, you can ask questions over there. But I'm giving you guys a heads up if I just disappear. But you can go on my Instagram and ask questions in the stories. I'm live in my stories on Instagram, and you can ask questions there. Is healing a lifelong process? No. There are places where you were really wounded and you can get fully whole. Now, is getting hurt a thing that happens throughout life? Yes. But the more whole you are, the quicker you get healed. All right. I was recently delivered from and came out of agreement with poverty. I'm still struggling with having enough to get by. So, poverty is not just a spiritual thing, it's a practical thing. So, if you got prayer, it's great, but you need to look at your budget. You need to look at your job. You need to look at your income. You need to look at what you need to do to either increase your income or decrease your debt. That's the only way you're going to have enough money. You either need to increase your income or decrease your debt. That is how you break poverty. And so increasing our value allows us to make more money. Decreasing our debt allows us to save more money. So do the spiritual stuff, yes, but then you got to do the practical stuff. All right. How will we know when DTA becomes available? Oh, you will know. All month of June, we have some free workshops going on. And usually at the end of those workshops, we share with you that enrollment has opened. So make sure that you are connected to that. I don't want to miss a thing, so I'm struggling to leave the live to IG. Stay here until I go out, and then you can jump